Kyrie Irving's with the Mavericks, but that doesn't mean the Heat aren't impacted by the trade somehow. The Heat miss out on acquiring the troubled star guard. And months after speculation had died in Brooklyn, is it time for the Heat to make a deal for Kevin Durant? We break down all that and more on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your Monday to Friday podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. However you might be tuning in, YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 using the promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. We're recording this minutes after news broke that the Nets are trading Kyrie Irving to the Mavericks for Spencer Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith, and an unprotected 2029 first-round pick, plus a pair of second-round picks. We'll talk about what this means for Kevin Durant and what else we're hearing ahead of Thursday's trade deadline in regards to the Heat. But first, David, what are your thoughts on the deal, and did the Heat get beat by the Mavericks in acquiring Kyrie?
As far as the overall deal, my feeling is that Miami dodged a hell of a bullet. And I know that a lot of Heat fans disagree with that take. And I understand what a controversial figure he is because of a lot of the off-the-court things that have happened. But even the on-the-court things that happen with Kyrie, there's no way to separate the two because they often wind up spilling into each other in a very messy way, whether it's a controversy of some kind or a comment or just I don't know if I feel like playing sort of air about him. I think it's problematic to swing for the fences and try and acquire a player like that, especially when there is controversy about him and there is the likelihood that he's going to miss a significant amount of time for some reason or another, whether it's injury, whether it's a suspension, whether it's I just don't know if I feel like playing, whether it's I don't feel like getting a vaccination. There's always something about him. Yeah. And that's the problem, is that he is as talented as he is troubled. And I don't know that it's worth the risk for Miami to try and acquire a player like that. And I know that I am in the minority in terms of not hating Kyle Lowry enough to want to acquire anybody not named Kyle Lowry. At the same time, I just think that you get a player like Kyrie Irving and you're basically looking for trouble because it's going to happen. He's forced his way out of Cleveland, the team that drafted him. He's forced his way out of Boston after one really messy season that derailed what had been a team on the rise. And it was just a very angsty, angry mess of a team for one season while he was there. Then he went to Brooklyn, sat out for injury, sat out for vaccine purposes, sat out for this and that, and, forced James Harden out. There's just so much about him that has been problematic over the few seasons that he's been a superstar. And I am personally glad that Miami did not make the move to acquire Irving. As far as whether or not they lost on him to Mavericks.
Let's stay there because I think you're right. Because, look, you and I agree in our takes on Kyrie Irving, how we feel about Kyrie Irving. I have not made it a secret that he is not my favorite player in the NBA, that I disagree with most of what he says, and I think he's entitled and kind of a hypocrite. And I wouldn't enjoy covering him from a personal standpoint. But that doesn't even really matter, number one, because the Heat don't listen to what I have to say when they're making their decisions. But number two, because you made the excellent point that this stuff does spill over to his on-the-court availability, right? Whether he's being suspended by his own team this year for that tweeting out an anti-Semitic film and not appropriately apologizing for it, and then being suspended from that way. The NBA league office having to take action with Kyrie Irving, not being available. Agree or disagree with his vaccination status last year, he was not available for the Brooklyn Nets, and that is something that is going to happen. If it's not the vaccine, and if it's not tweeting out anti-Semitic films and getting suspended for it, it doesn't even matter if you agree with this, David, or if you, the listener, agree with what Kyrie is doing, or if you think that it was overblown or overstated. Whatever anybody thinks doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it affects his availability on the court. And that is something that people have to take into consideration. And that's, by the way, what led to the trade request in the first place from Kyrie Irving, is because the Nets, who just witnessed this thing for the last 4 years, were basically like, we can't count on you to be available, so we're not going to guarantee you this 3 years guaranteed max contract because you haven't earned it. You haven't earned it. And then Kyrie Irving says, well, I think I have earned it. And if you don't think I've gotten it, then I'm going to trade it. Or if you don't think I earn it, then I'm going to look for a place that will give it to me. And by the way, we have no idea if the Dallas Mavericks are going to give him that. So all of that to say is it should not be shocking that the Heat did not seriously investigate Kyrie Irving when he threatened to opt out over the summer. Everything that I was hearing and was told going into this the last few days after Kyrie just recently requested a trade again was that the Heat, anybody that I talked to said that they would be really surprised if Kyrie Irving ended up on the Miami Heat, not just because the Miami Heat don't really have what it takes to get it done, and we'll debate that here in a second too, but mostly because he's just not a culture fit. And if you want to poo-poo the Heat and Heat culture and all that kind of stuff, go ahead. I don't care. I'm just telling you what I heard going into this, and anything that led to Kyrie Irving in Miami, I would have been shocked, David, if that were to happen, because of how Mickey Arison feels about stuff, about how Pat Riley feels about things. They want a player that they can count on, and and at the end of the day, you just can't count on Kyrie Irving. And for me, everything that I heard going into this, that was basically a non-starter for Miami.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. For a team that is so driven and so single-minded, and there's winning and there's everything else, how can you count on a player like Kyrie, who's more often focused on the everything else? And yes, the winning happens by virtue of that talent. He is a great player. There's no denying that when he's out there. And everything else is going to get really, really ugly. Look, the Heat win a lot of games, have won a lot of games over the past 27, 28 years of Pat Riley's tenure. They've been a very successful franchise, but I can't imagine a locker room being more disharmonious than one with Kyrie Irving there, because he's going to fracture at some point, because that's just what he does.
Yep.
And that's the problem.
People want to point, well, Jimmy Butler and Kyrie Irving are friends. Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving were best friends. They went to Brooklyn together, and it didn't work out. And we just saw the divorce there. So all that. Let's talk about whether or not the Heat could have even gotten in on this, because I've kind of seen differing opinions on this. For the record, I think the Heat could have matched something similar to this Mavericks offer. I actually thought that Brooklyn got a lot more for Kyrie Irving than I thought they were going to get for Kyrie Irving. Spencer Dinwiddie is a good player. Dorian Finney-Smith is a good two-way player. An unprotected first-round pick in 2029 was what surprised me the most, that there's not even any protections on that pick. I would imagine, I've got no reporting here, but it's just me guessing, that was probably the sticking point in the hours leading up to the consummation of this deal, is whether or not that pick is going to be top 3, top 5, top 7, unprotected, whatever it was going to be. The fact that Brooklyn got an unprotected pick from Dallas, to me, was surprising. The 2 second-rounders, who cares? The Heat could have offered the 2 second-round picks. They could have offered an unprotected pick in 2029. They could have done that. And in terms of Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith, yeah, maybe they could have put like a Caleb Martin and a Duncan Robinson on the table, or even a Kyle Lowry and Caleb Martin. That to me is in the same ballpark of that Mavericks offer. And I think if Miami were to do that, if they had done that early on in sort of the hours after Kyrie demanded the trade, they would have at least been in the running for Kyrie Irving. And that would have been an offer that could competed with this Mavericks one that they ultimately went with. But again, like, you can't get beat by another team in trade offers if you're not even playing the game in the first place. And I have no sense that the Heat were ever involved seriously in Kyrie Irving.
No, I imagine that, from the Brooklyn side of things, they took the best deal available, one that was readily available, one that could be finished, finalized before the trade deadline, because we've heard that maybe Kyrie would continue to play games, or maybe he wouldn't. And we just don't know. Again, with him, there's always a huge question mark hanging over everything. And so they had probably done whatever research was possible and extending whatever talks had been begun over the offseason, and then just kind of continued and said, oh, he's back on his what again, and he's ready to ask out of Brooklyn. Let's resume talks and let's pick up where we left off. And again, I think Dallas gave up a lot, but I guess in the grand scheme of things, it's probably fair value for a star level player.
The Mavericks were backed into a corner way more than the Heat are. I mean, Luka's right now their title window is wide open with Luka Doncic, theoretically at least. And so when you have a player like that, a top 5 player, you got to make moves. And we heard the scuttle that, hey, is Luka going to end up in Miami in 5 years? Like what Bill Simmons was talking about. And I think that was real. I think there was a real angst on Dallas's part of what can we do? We let Jalen Brunson walk away for nothing. Like, how can we support our superstar so that we don't end up having to face these questions in a very real way a few years down the road? And I don't know if Kyrie Irving is the answer to that or not. That's for Nick Angstad and Locked On Mavericks to figure out. But it put them in you need desperation in order to make a move like this. And I think the Dallas Mavericks were certainly operating from a place of desperation, even more than the Miami Heat were, right? And that's the thing too. Why the timing of this deal could potentially be important when it comes to Kevin Durant's future. That's what we're going to talk about next. Kevin Durant, the Miami Heat. Could it happen? That's coming up next. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. Look, you can start taking Luka Doncic to score more than 26. Maybe you could score, maybe Kyrie Irving could score more than 26 points on any given night. And that's how easy it is to make a wager on PrizePicks.com. Look, it's so easy to use. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they'll score more or less than their PrizePicks projections, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people, just you versus the projections. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you can watch. This includes the NBA, of course, the NFL. You got one game left, well, aside from the Pro Bowl, I suppose. College basketball, men's and women's, WNBA games are picking up. Disc golf, boxing, Eurobasket, you name it. You can find it all on PrizePicks, and entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. Safe and fast withdrawals, and currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to PrizePicks.com, sign up today, play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50 back. So don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign-up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. So download the PrizePicks app or go to PrizePicks.com today.
Locked On Heat is also available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please do subscribe, and thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. So the next question is, what does this mean for Kevin Durant? On one hand, with what the Nets got back, that's still a pretty competitive roster. It's a bunch of two-way kind of role players around Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant kind of feels like he's in Luka's situation now, where it's like, okay, like this is not bad players, but no other superstars next to me. There's also a few more days for the Nets to kind of take what they have and sort of recalibrate their team, right? The trade deadline is not until Thursday, so they could still make some moves here. On the other hand, we know that how this worked last summer. When Durant got wind that Kyrie Irving was going to potentially opt out of his contract, he demanded a trade. We remember that the Suns and the Heat were the kind of two teams on the top of his list of potential destinations. So now that Kyrie is gone, Durant has 4 or 5 days to consider his own future in Brooklyn, perhaps renew his trade demand. Either way, I could tell you that the Heat and plenty of other teams are monitoring this situation. Regardless, we obviously don't have any sort of renewed trade demand by Kevin Durant, but this is something that's going to hover over Brooklyn and over Durant between now and February 9th, and even between then and the offseason, when maybe Kevin Durant says, you know what, he could potentially say, let me play out this season, let me get healthy, let me get back, see what we have here in Brooklyn, and then maybe I'll reconsider all of this stuff in the offseason, depending on how this season goes. I think the Heat are going to monitor the Kevin Durant situation. I think it's going to take, and they're probably calling Brooklyn, and I would imagine that Brooklyn's response is, KD has not told us he wants a trade, so we're not going to even entertain that. And by the way, they could not entertain it just the way like they did when KD actually did publicly demand the trade. They said, well, he's under contract for 3 more years anyway, so we don't really care about the trade demand. We're not moving him. So it's sticky, but it's something that I think the Heat and a lot of teams are monitoring.
I think no one knows what's going to happen with Kevin Durant, including Kevin Durant himself. This is just not how he operates. He's never sought the midseason trade. He was unhappy in Golden State. He was unhappy in Oklahoma City, and he still stuck it out until free agency happened. So if he's going to push for a trade, it's not going to happen until the offseason, if he pushes for a trade. Having said that, there's nothing wrong or nothing. I would expect, rather, Andy Ellisberg, Masai Ujiri, and every other GM worth their salt to be whispering in Sean Marks' ear right now and saying, look, it's going to happen. He's going to ask out. He's not going to want to be there. He's not going to want to deal with Ben Simmons. He's not going to want to deal with whatever putrid supporting cast. And I hate to be so harsh, but that's just a reality in Brooklyn right now. There is just substance there.
What was that quote earlier in the season? Look at me. I'm playing with Edmund Sumner and all these other players. Like, that's what it is now. And there's no Kyrie Irving coming back from whatever suspension to sort of back him up.
No light at the end of this dark tunnel in Brooklyn. So, he's going to ask out. And so it's up to every GM to earn their respective salaries and say, look, this is what we can offer you. He's going to ask out. Let's see what we can get done now rather than wait. You're not going to win the title this year. That's unrealistic. You had a chance. And you just traded your best chance of that title to Dallas. And so now what are you playing for? A mid seed in the Eastern Conference, a likely first round exit?
I think that's certainly part of it. And I see a lot of people talk about Brooklyn, like saying exactly, what do you got? You got Kevin Durant, who's an amazing player, but he's older. He suffers one of these kinds of injuries. And, the Jimmy Butler rolling onto his ankle is why he's out now. And that's sort of a freak one, but still he's older. He's dealing with injuries every single year. It seems like, what are you really building toward? And while that logically that makes sense, and there should be a push by maybe the Nets, people in the Nets front office to say exactly this and try to launch into a full-scale rebuild and get whatever kind of return you can get for Kevin Durant, which would be a huge return, right? He's still Kevin Durant. If you put him out in the open market, you're going to get a haul for him. On the other hand, he's Kevin Durant, and you're the Brooklyn Nets, and if you trade Kevin Durant, depending on what you get back, I don't know that there's an appetite to sort of restart in a market like that. Kevin Durant is a superstar.
They have to get rid of him, man. Like this is.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I just don't know that they agree with you.
They have to. He wanted Sean Marks' job. He asked for Steve Nash's head on a silver platter, and he got it. And they were winning games, and now they're not going.
But
to
what
win
leverage
games.
does Kevin Durant have over them? Like KD, he signed that contract extension. Like they called his bluff over the summer when he already demanded a trade. They've been down this road before.
Yeah. KD doesn't have any leverage, but it's also time to just kind of cut bait here and move on. You've got a lot of pieces, a lot of players that are already in flux in Toronto. I would be surprised if by the end of next week, OG Anunoby, an ex-player from Toronto, isn't in a Brooklyn uniform.
You think they're going to get traded for Kevin Durant?
If you're on the Toronto side of things saying, yeah, we're going to get 3 first-round picks for OG Anunoby, which is a little bit more than I would think that you could possibly get for OG Anunoby, make that trade. You can get KD north of the border, a superstar, revitalize the franchise,
I think
whatever the heck you got to do.
But that kind of contradicts what you said earlier, where Kevin Durant doesn't usually demand those trades midseason. But I guess what you're saying is that you wouldn't even wait for the demand if you're Brooklyn.
Yeah. It's not up to KD. You tried the KD experiment. He sabotaged everything. Yes. He sabotaged everything by bringing Kyrie aboard, by bringing DeAndre Jordan aboard, by saying, yeah, I'm cool with Steve Nash for 2 or 3 years, whatever. Yeah. Knowing that he was injured, they tied their franchise's short-term future to KD, and it hasn't worked out. Cut bait. Move on. Let go.
Well, let's say they do. Let's say they do. I think that would be maybe... In regards to Miami's chances of landing Kevin Durant, I think that the Heat would hope that this is more of an offseason thing than a midseason thing. Because if it's a midseason thing, we all know the difficulties of trading somebody like Tyler Herro with the poison pill contract. It's not impossible. It's out there that it's impossible. I said it from the moment Tyler Herro signed it. Stop using the word impossible. It's not impossible.
Heat cap expert Albert Nagmar he tweeted something about that earlier today.
Well, I said, if anybody talking about Heat cap experts, Andy Ellisberg, he is like the preeminent. You don't think that he signed that contract extension fully knowing that he's got an escape route? Of course he did. He knew what they had. You could send, and I said it when it first started, send him to San Antonio. You can get San Antonio involved. They have tons of cap space, or a team like San Antonio. And if it were to happen today, San Antonio is the only team with that much cap space to facilitate a deal where you're able to move some contracts to San Antonio and offset the difference between what the poison pill contract would be, which is worth more to the acquiring team than the team it's leaving in terms of salary matching purposes, blah, blah, blah. It's not impossible. And I've said it from the moment Tyler Herro signed it. That said, it is difficult to involve that third party. And so if you are the Miami Heat, then I would imagine any trade would start with Tyler Herro. because of the other things in play. You can't have Bam Adebayo and Ben Simmons on the same team. I don't think that the Heat would trade Bam Adebayo because Bam was off the table the first time these conversations were being had.
Yeah,
and all these things.
I'm not changing that.
So it would be Herro on the table in a Kevin Durant move as sort of the centerpiece of that. That's more feasible if you wanted to even go that route in the summer for Miami than it is in the offseason. But the other part of this, and it's something we're going to get to on the other side of the break,
hold on. Let's assume for 1 second. Let's assume that Miami can put together, again, theoretical and unlikely as hell, but let's assume that they can, just for this purpose, put together the best offer in midseason. Do you think that they should hold off on acquiring, or do you think they should go ahead and pull the trigger in the middle of the season, like within the next week or so?
Well, yeah, my point was I think that it just becomes easier for them to put together the best deal in the offseason as opposed to the summer. But if they could,
did you see it disrupting the Heat season if they could acquire KD like next week? No.
Disrupting in a way it makes them better. It's disruptive in a good way. It's disruptive in that you get Kevin Durant on your team, and now you become maybe the title favorites in the Eastern Conference, depending on what it is that you have to give up. If it's Kevin Durant, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo, you can figure out the rest in terms of this season. Now, long term, I do think that there's concerns, right? I think that's obvious. Like you've now taken your window and but you've opened the window in the short term in a way that it's not really open right now. But it would cost you all the picks. It would cost you your best young player outside of Bam and Tyler Herro, and no real way to kind of build around these pieces other than mid-level exceptions and undrafted guys and all these kinds of things, which the Heat could do. Again, if your top three is KD, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo, you'll figure it out. It makes it difficult to build around them. Like I said, you figure it out. I don't know. I think you would do it. To your point, why wouldn't Atlanta put Trae Young on the table at this point? Like, why wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like, this is the kind of, like, it's the difference between what you would get for Kevin Durant versus what the offers were for Kyrie Irving is massive. Like, there are 6 players in the NBA you wouldn't trade for Kevin Durant straight up? Maybe 8. That's the kind of range we're talking about now. Like, and so everybody else is in the NBA of the other 450 players, they're on the table for Kevin Durant. So the odds of Miami saying, hey, we could put the 3 unprotected first, we can unlock the protections on the OKC one, 3 unprotected firsts, whatever second rounders you want, Tyler Herro, and any other salary filler, that's what we'll do for Kevin Durant. And then there's 28 other teams saying we can kind of get close to that or even better. So it's tough.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot to process.
And Durant, and by the way, in terms of Durant, I should have mentioned, this is not really a situation where I think teams could say, is Durant going to be unhappy, and that he could create a fuss. That would be the only way he can create leverage, but that didn't really work in the summer either. When he tried to create a list of preferred destinations with Phoenix and Miami, and then all we heard about for 2 weeks was, will New Orleans or Memphis trade for him? He just does, or Toronto, he doesn't have that much leverage in a trade, but I don't know. It's fascinating. Stars usually tend to get to where they want to go. Kyrie Irving tried to get out of Brooklyn. It didn't work, and then it worked. And now Kyrie's playing somewhere else. So maybe the same thing can happen with KD. And if he wants to end up in Miami desperately, maybe that's something that just ends up happening. I'm overthinking this.
I think he can force a trade off Brooklyn. I don't know that he can necessarily direct to where he wants to go. I can't. Right. Aside from Harden to Brooklyn and then Harden to Philadelphia, it's very rare that you can see such a purposeful trade working out, because there's always some mystery team X that can always up the ante a little bit and throw in one more second round pick or one more player.
We just saw it, right? It was like Donovan Mitchell and the Knicks. It's a done deal. Where's Donovan Mitchell playing now? He's in Cleveland. So you're absolutely right. And I just don't know that the Heat have what it takes to kind of be that dark horse. It feels like they almost have to have it work out perfectly for them. And in a case like with Kevin Durant, there's just going to be so many teams vying for Kevin Durant if he's actually on the trading block.
Do you include Tyler in the deal? Point blank.
Would I?
Do you include Tyler? Yes.
I think you have to. If you're in on Kevin Durant and trying to maximize the Jimmy Butler title window, then you have to, because there's no other way to get him. So if you want Kevin Durant, that's almost you know how I feel about Tyler Herro, but if you can get Kevin Durant, maybe you just do it. What else?
I agree.
What else can the Heat do before the deadline? We're going to talk about what's on the table next. But first, David, tell listeners about Built Bar.
Today's episode brought to you by Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? You've got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays. I know a lot of people set a goal trying to eat healthier, one of your resolutions. If it's February, early February, if you're still hanging tight, hanging tough, then Built is the option for you, because with Built, healthy is actually tasty. They're so delicious you won't think they're good for you. Perfect for your New Year's resolutions. And what makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, and many more. I'm not sure how Built does it. No one really does. But these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is they're healthy. Only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein, better than any bar out there in the market. So now you don't have to even wait around to get a box. For years, we've been telling you, go to Built.com. Get your mixed box order at Built.com. Well, forget that. Now you can go to Walmart or Sam's Club, pick up a box of your favorite flavor for 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. You got a Sam's Club run-in. They have a 13-bar box with hit flavors like brownie, batter, and churro. You'll thank me later. But go to Built.com, go to Walmart, go to Sam's Club, and get your Built Bars today.
So beyond the Nets situation, what else are the Heat doing to improve the team ahead of Thursday's trade deadline? I think that the priority right now, David, is trying to move off of the money that they owe to certain players next season, and in trying to curb some of what it is that they owe on the luxury tax potentially for next year when the Tyler Herro and Jimmy Butler extensions kick in. So I think they're trying to move off of money owed for next year while also trying to add front court help for this season. You continue to monitor the Kevin Durant situation. What's going on there? You got sort of one eye directed in Brooklyn's way in that sense. But you're still operating these other projects over here if you're Miami ahead of the deadline. And so to me, it's move off that money owed for next year and try to add that front court help. That, from what I'm hearing, that seems to be where Miami's head is at. Contracts, when we talk about those contracts, Duncan Robinson, Dwayne Dedmon, those are definitely in play pretty aggressively by Miami. I do think that they're kind of more passively than the aggressive shopping of Duncan and Dwayne. I think they're more passively investigating what it is that they could get for Kyle Lowry, who is...
Well, I was going to ask that because I think has the market changed now with Kyrie Irving in Dallas? Like, I've seen some people suggest that now there's this heightened market, but I disagree with that idea, because it wasn't like Kyrie Irving was on the market a week ago.
Right.
And there wasn't exactly a smattering of teams clamoring to acquire a 37-year-old point guard that's clearly in decline. So I don't know that teams now are saying, oh, I've got to get me a Kyle Lowry. That's my only chance at contention this year. So I think it's the same obstacles you had before. If you can convince a team that, yes, he can still win, that he can still be a functional point guard, that he can still play high-level defense, and they're willing to make that investment for the next half a season and beyond, next year as well, then that deal is, again, a possibility. But I think we've been pretty consistent saying.
I think it might loosely impact the two LA teams because the Clippers were sort of said to be in on Kyrie Irving. It's pretty clear that the Clippers are going to be aggressive in trying to find a point guard upgrade. But we always mentioned them as a Kyle Lowry destination in the first place. And everything that I've heard was that I think Lowry is sort of on their list of point guards that they'll consider. I just think he's lower than where Kyrie Irving was, where Fred VanVleet and Mike Conley are. But then, we just saw the price that Kyrie went for. The Heat are not going to get what Brooklyn got for Kyrie for Kyle Lowry. That's not breaking news. And Fred VanVleet is going to be more expensive. Mike Conley, everything we're hearing from Utah is that Danny Ainge wants picks for. I don't think that the Heat necessarily are even looking for high value draft picks in return for Kyle Lowry. I think they're maybe just like what I said before, looking to break up some of that money that they owe for next year for a player who's just not even closing games for them right now. And by the way, is also hurt as we're having this conversation. But so I think that's probably, I'm with you. I don't think that it moves the needle too much. Like as big of the deal as the Kyrie Irving one, it wasn't really a domino. There's no ripple effects from that because, like you said, we didn't expect this to be the case anyway, and now he's moved. Moving the Lakers thing though, maybe the Lakers.
Can I add one more thing though? Like we just talked about, I can't recall one episode last week when Miami was in the midst of their winning streak, or maybe it was following the Cavs win, because they were making their way up the standings. And a tough loss to New York, another tough loss to Milwaukee later. Heat fans a little bit more disillusioned than they were just a week ago. That's the nature of fandom. But with Brooklyn seemingly or likely to be worse, does that intensify Miami's need to make a big trade? Because I wonder if that's the case or not. Their chances in the East are certainly better.
Yep.
there's a very realistic chance that this team that, again, many people were questioning, they're not even a playoff team. They could absolutely wind up with a first round, home court advantage. They could be a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference. We didn't think that was
of the top 4, I think in Sharpie, barring any major injuries, you've got Boston, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia in some order. And then, I think Cleveland's there. But you're right. It's a good point. Like, Brooklyn's off the table. Like, they're not a title contender. Again, we have like 4 days before the deadline. They could package some of these other contracts and make another big move. Who knows? Like, I don't know. Maybe they're an OG and maybe they trade for OG and Anunoby, not for Kevin Durant. Who knows? Like, I have no idea. But I just threw that out there. I literally just thought about that. It's probably not going to happen.
That's a big possibility.
But it's Fred VanVleet. Like, there are names that they could go out. Like, Brooklyn could still make moves and recalibrate their team around Brooklyn. But as the Nets are currently constructed, they are not a title contender. They're off the table. So that's a good point. Maybe that increases the urgency on Miami's need to say, you know what? Maybe we're willing to put a little bit more on the table if it means that we can jump into the top 4 in the Eastern standings. And maybe we're one injury away from another Eastern Conference Finals run, like an injury to another team away, And so, I think that has to be a factor. And by the way, I do think that the appetite to move a first-round pick this past summer wasn't as high as it is now. I think the bar has lowered for Miami on what it would take for them to trade a first-round pick, like a 2023 first-rounder. I think they're more willing to do that now for a player who fits, who isn't necessarily like a short-term play, but a guy that, like, somebody that fits, whether it's next to Bam Adebayo in the front court or is like somebody that can help them improve their 26th ranked offense, like whatever it is. I think they're willing to move a first-round pick for the right player who can age with this group, right? And so I think moving off of these salaries, using these salaries, maybe bunching them up and adding a first-round pick, for example, like Duncan Robinson plus Dwayne Dedmon plus a first-round pick. I think that Miami's probably shopping that package and just seeing what they can get for it. And there's maybe you add a Nikola Jovic to it or a Max Strus or second rounders or whatever it is. But I think for a starting point, you're calling other GMs and saying, is this of any interest? What would you be willing to take or what would you be willing to give up for something like this and things like that? I don't know if the Heat are going to get anything for that. But I do think that I think the bar is lower of what it would take for them to part with a first-round pick, where in the summer it was basically like Kevin Durant. That's what they want, Donovan Mitchell. Like, that's what it was going to be to part with even a single first-round pick. I think the bar is a little bit lower now.
I agree. I also kind of feel like this was the first domino. Like, everybody was playing the waiting game so much, and Kyrie, God bless his soul, he just set fire to everything and just kicked it off in a way that a lot of people were anticipating, right? Because there was who's going to be the first team? Who's going to be the first one to say, oh, okay, we've got to do something. We've got to make the change. And now I wonder if that's the league-wide ripple effect, not necessarily one that impacts Miami, although it could, as you pointed out, maybe force their hand a little bit more, or at least open things up to saying, you know what, we're willing to make that move now in the short term so we can improve our team. Because I get that feeling, right? And maybe I'm just speculating.
No, I think the title odds on Dallas just increased pretty, like in the sense that they have, they're
things
more
changed
considered
so dramatically over the course of one weekend.
And so now if you're a team like the Warriors, if you're, do you want to make more of an all-in move?
Steph Curry, right? Yeah.
Steph Curry.
Like, Steph Curry's going to miss multiple weeks, right? I mean,
it might actually,
title chances are off.
Yeah, and that could actually increase the urgency on Golden State's part to make a huge move. And so you're right. Maybe now the buyers are even more aggressive as buyers, and then that drives up the price for the high-level contributors that the sellers are willing to move. So we could have a pretty noisy trade deadline here. All right. I had a whole list of players that I think that the Heat should investigate, but we're out of time here, so I think I'm going to save that.
Let's save those. That's the next episode, buddy. That's a tease right there.
So we call a tease.
Stay
here.
tuned.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. Now make your second listen game to game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. David, thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely, Wes.